This session is about Smart Cities Road to Recovery, and our keynote speaker is Chris Murray, City Manager of the City of Toronto. So we've talked a bit about what are smart cities and what makes a smart city, but we're going to address the question of how does a smart city manage in a pandemic? What are the smart tools that does it deploy? And so Chris Murray's in the middle of a COVID-19 maelstrom, and he's developed a number of reports to City Council, the most recent of which is entitled Towards Recovery and Building a Renewed Toronto. So Chris will talk to us a bit about that, and then there'll be a few questions. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so thanks for this opportunity. So just if I can context set just a bit here. The city of Toronto, of all of you know, is about 2.9 million people, which makes us the fourth largest city in North America. Over the last 10 years, we've been the fastest growing city in North America. In fact, in the last 10 years, we've added what amounts to be the population of Burlington and Oakville combined. As well, from a regional economic standpoint, I'm sure many people realize, in terms of GDP, we represent about 30% of the GDP in the country. With that, this organization that I head is a $13.5 billion a year organization from an operating standpoint. From a 10-year capital standpoint, we're in the order of about $43.5 billion, about 12 billion of that to the previous talker, 12 billion of that relates to TTC. Now, all of that to say that we still have literally billions of dollars, what we call below the line, that is not budgeted, that is still important for us to address. From a staffing standpoint, 35,000 staff. And as an organization, we deliver about 150 services. So my background is urban planning. I'm a city planner by profession. For 10 years as city manager of Hamilton, and for the last 2 years and a bit, city manager of Toronto. So the COVID over the last several months has represented a shock, not just to Toronto, but cities around the world, countries around the world for that matter. And in Toronto, particularly from an economic standpoint, we've are, as pointed out by Michael, we're still in the midst of this. So the story hasn't ended, it's still unfolding. But we know that our retail sector has been heavily hit, as well as our entertainment sector and our transportation sector. So when you break down the sectors of our economy, those three areas have been deeply impacted, meaning that we have double-digit unemployment. And so, yes, there will be an answer to the COVID virus, but the question for all of us really is, from a socioeconomic standpoint, what does the future hold? And so when I say that, as you well know, teleworking has become a way of life for many of us, and evidenced by this meeting, as well as online shopping, which I must proudly admit, I still haven't bought anything online, but I'm sure many of you have. All of that is going to affect us in ways we don't fully know right now. But I can simply say to you that over the coming months and years, our recovery is certainly going to be affected by the behaviors that are taking place right now. So from a Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild perspective, there was a report that was published to which I provided a covering report, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what I think we heard through the engagement that we've done with many of the community stakeholder groups, as well as staff working for the City of Toronto, is that our understanding of prosperity, however you define it, is going to be affected on the way forward. And by that I mean there is a massive equity challenge that we are all facing. Just how COVID has impacted people, I mean, those that were marginalized to begin with have been heavily impacted. when you think about the sectors of the economy that have been affected, we know that there are many people that work in those sectors who are not employed right now, who are working in very much precarious jobs. So what their future looks like should be a concern to all of us. So equity is certainly a major component of our rethinking of what prosperity means. As well, very clearly, climate action. We're dealing with COVID now, but we know that the next and actually present crisis that we're still trying to face is the whole matter of climate action and resiliency. And so when I say resiliency, I think about it in the sense of the risk if we don't address it. What does that mean in terms of impacts, not just to infrastructure, but to people in the city of Toronto? So that has to factor into however we look at prosperity moving forward. And then our well-being as people. There's no question we had challenges before from the standpoint of mental health and addiction. That has all been amplified. And how that unfolds in the coming weeks, months, and years down the road, how we address it is going to be critical. So from all of that, there is a report, as I mentioned, the TOR report, which has 83 recommendations in it, which sounds a lot, but in fact, a lot of those recommendations were matters that we had acknowledged before COVID even happened. So dealing with many of the equity challenges that we're facing. But if you're to break it down in terms of the 6 major things that we are focused on right now, number one is certainly the economy. How it is that we, working together, other levels of government in this community, do the things not just on a day-to-day basis, but a week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year. How we kind of support the economy and have it build back better is really a critically important focus of the city. Neighborhoods and related well-being. Those neighborhoods that have been most heavily impacted by COVID and were historically challenges in terms of the equity challenges that they were facing. We need to have a very particular focus on those parts of the city if we are to achieve what is possible here in Toronto. The third theme is the climate action resiliency theme, which I just talked about. And the fourth, as to the previous discussion, mobility and infrastructure. We have a chance right now to advance strategies that the city has had from a mobility standpoint in ways in which we might not have before. And then we have in the fifth area of focus is the modernizing Toronto. So, to any of the people that work in the banking industry, the transportation industry, and probably many of the industries that are represented in this session, there's no question the city of Toronto and how it provides services has been given just a great opportunity as a result of COVID to completely not just rethink, but to deliver services in a much more effective manner. And then, of course, the sixth and final, but maybe if not the most important, it has to be thought of in this regard, is our long-term financial sustainability. 2020, we, because of rising revenue challenges and costs, are chasing somewhere in the order of about $1.5 billion. 2021 is going to look like pretty much the same. You can only imagine if you're trying to run a city with an operating budget of $13 billion, that you're chasing about roughly 10% every year, hoping that upper levels of government are going to help you out. I would not want to do that for very long. So we're being quite grateful for the support that Toronto's gotten this year, and we need to have similar support next year, but on an ongoing basis. We can't really run the show with that much uncertainty. So all of that to say that our approach, our way forward, and this report was just approved the other day. The days of governments operating in silos, generating policies and programs and laws that aren't really fully understood has got to be behind us. And so we are proposing a whole of government approach so that we are working with the federal and provincial government, making sure that policy programs and investments are effective. As well as, I need to work with this community. So you that are on the call and other stakeholder groups, We can't be, I think, at odds as much as maybe in the past, and we much more so will benefit from people, being focused on the challenges, moving ahead, and working in a much more productive, collaborative way. And of course, the Toronto Public Service, its culture is changing. It needs to become much more effective when it comes to what this session is about, and that is, the smart city thinking and application of not just technology, but the way in which we manage data and take better advantage of data. And there's been a number of things that we've done over the last several months, but I can say this, that, as Mayor Tory would say, the city had to work at wartime speed. Those within my organization that may have doubted the importance of systems that are much more mature than what we've had in the past. I think those that have doubted it are maybe more convinced now that a modernized Toronto is in the best interest of not just us that work for the city, but for the community as a whole. And so we've been deploying a number of technologies over the last several months. And I'll end with this. I mean, the one that was most apparent and necessary was, if we're going to work from home, just to have the means by which to do that. So we went from the ability to support about 1,200 people to over 9,000 within literally a couple of weeks. I think any doubters in the organization as to the importance of technology, that certainly helped. So maybe I'll just end there and respond to any questions or comments that you have.
Well, thanks, Chris. I think everybody on this call can identify with your last comment, because we're mostly speaking from home. There's a number of points that are made in the report that you've touched on in your comments now, and I'm gonna pick some of these comments from the report and ask for a little bit more granularity. You talked about working together for different levels of government. One of the sections under collaborating across boundaries has a couple of points. The first one was that constitutional division of powers between provincial and federal governments with no constitutional recognition for municipalities as kind of a barrier, misalignment between roles, responsibilities, and fiscal capacity. Again, a constitutional issue. So we've got a constitutional structure, federal, provincial, and municipal, that puts the taxing authority at senior levels and all the, or a substantial portion of the spending authority at the municipal level. You've talked a bit about working together. Can you provide us with a bit more granularity on how you see that working relationship play itself out?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all the taxes that are paid by businesses and individuals in this country, about 8% of that total is comes to municipalities. So 92% is basically within the responsibility of the federal and provincial government. So, I go back to the 150 services that we provide, and think about when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed, how many of those services impact you. A little tough to run it on 8%. But notwithstanding that, we have been aligned now for the last several months with 5 of the other largest cities in the country, and to basically compare notes as to how it is that the COVID crisis is impacting us. And there is a number of common themes, some of which I've already touched upon. So as cities, major urban centers, recognizing the constitutional point that you just made, we are working together in ways that we've never worked before. And so and what's really interesting is the speed at which people are returning our phone calls, federally and provincially, in terms of what we're seeing happen, and how it is that the actions of the federal and provincial government are working or not. We take, as municipalities right now, the view that there are some common interests that we all share. And I'll give you an example. The digital economy is critically important to the federal government. And we are fortunate amongst the cities that are working together, not just across the country, but within the GTHA. We are comparing our collective notes in terms of how it is that we could support the actions of the federal and provincial government as it relates to digital economy. So drilling down on that, we know not just in the rural area, the broadband shortfall, there are broadband shortfalls within the city of Toronto. So, the more marginalized neighborhoods don't have either the actual infrastructure to access, the digital economy. They don't have the financial means either. So, that is something that is being, pointed to in our conversations with the federal and provincial government. So whatever strategy we are going to evolve, in terms of the digital economy, we need to make sure that not just a few, but all people are going to be served by it. The other thing I'll point out right now, the at-home shopping that's going on. Again, cities rely on property tax. And so as we watch the retail sector try to adjust to an online service delivery platform, not everyone is going to be successful. And so when those businesses go out of business, it affects our Main Street, it affects our downtown. And at the end of the day, it affects my bottom line, which is the property tax. So, we look at that. Again, we were designed around properties when it comes to revenues. And when the economy is going into the clouds, there's a disconnect. And so that's something that we need to, I think, talk about. And then the other thing I'll end is we're all obviously in Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, we're working with Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary. We're looking at teleworking and the effect that it's having in our downtowns, in our offices. And, and all of that is critical to supporting the retail sector. Don't underestimate the consequence of people working from home. It will benefit some of the outlying communities, no question, maybe some of our rural communities, but there could very well be a price to pay in terms of these large urban centers and how much they rely on people coming to work every morning and going home at night.
So one of the sections in the report talks about evolving financial challenges. And there's one provision says that we need to evaluate which services we deliver and how we deliver them. We'll need to look for options for outsourcing alternative service delivery, delaying or canceling the return of paused services, or delivering services in new ways, such as online or through amended service agreements. Sort of the notion of steering rather than rowing. Can you talk a bit about your thinking about how that evolution is likely or might unfold?
You would think in light of a global pandemic and all the challenges that a global pandemic creates, that you would want your municipality to have a full range of tools by which to continue to deliver services. So some of which it may make sense to continue to do it itself, and it may make sense to go with a different model. But if I can, I'm going to drill down on, because it relates to the previous topic that you were talking about. We are looking in this report at the idea of, for example, transit and housing, instead of being looked at from a municipal by municipal perspective, looking at in a more regional perspective. So if you think about, service integration, and the previous speaker, I think, is absolutely right. We are talking about services. So the idea of service integration and the, and fare integration, it's how you do that when you have 11 different transit operations within the GTHA. It'd be like all of us agreeing to ordering the same lunch. Good luck in doing that when you got so many different opinions, all of which are being supported by different councils, notwithstanding, that Metrolinx is part of the service delivery family. So we really need to look at, and it's nothing new. If you look at Vancouver, you look at Montreal, you look at major cities around the world, they have regional transit services. So we think that's an approach that is probably long overdue and needs to be examined. The other is housing. It'd be I think, appropriate as we're designing out our transit system broadly in a regional sense. We look at housing because, right now, I was a former CEO of City Housing Hamilton and housing director. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that as much as the bricks and mortar matter in a housing system, access to the services, be it mental health, addictions, or other services that the province controls, is really important to the quality of life that people experience within a housing system. So, I look at what was formerly the LINs and now has been, given a different title. We need to start to marry the services of our healthcare industry with our bricks and mortar, if you will. So that is difficult to do on a municipal by municipal basis because we're working at two different levels of government. So again, that may lend itself well to a regional approach. And then not all housing is necessarily social related housing. That, affordable housing, you would think you would be developing it kind of hand in glove with your transportation system. So, I think we have a great opportunity just to reimagine the way in which we deliver those two fundamental services.
So we've talked a little bit about engagement between government to government, and we talked a bit about engagement with the private sector and the effects of COVID-19 on the private sector in the city. One of the sections in the report talks about public engagement. And one of the comments says a well-run city depends on evidence-based decision-making using best available research, data analytics, public input, and information on service to guide decisions and better enable outcomes. It supports greater trust and confidence through public participation, transparency, and accountability in policy and program development and on performance of city services. And I think rife throughout this report, it looks at engagement with people, gathering data, making decisions based on evidence-based decisions based on data that's been collected. And how is this experience in COVID-19 and the circumstances you're confronted with exaggerated or made more important that process of gathering data and making decisions based on evidence-based decisions?
Well, so I thank you for that question, Michael. I mean, certainly I've been with the city of Toronto for 2 years, and so I have a fairly good understanding of how it operates well and where it's challenged. I remember years ago attending a meeting with some senior administrators from Toronto who referred to the organization as a loose association of warring tribes, which kind of struck me as funny and is not unique to Toronto. I mean, when you deliver as many different services as municipalities do, it's not hard to become siloized, if you will. And so when we think about data, the quality of data, how data is mined, how we generate good decisions from data. Most municipalities, and I'm quite familiar with, aren't as mature as many of the people that are on this call right now. And so that has really come, we knew it before. The need to address it is really evident, not just amongst people like myself and my senior leadership team, but I can say amongst my corporate leadership group, which oversees the 45 program areas that Toronto has. And that, the days of data maturity being advanced in certain parts of the organization and not all. I think that has been really kind of amplified in the last little while. The other thing is that, we've been evolving a concept called the City Lab, if you will, where, the city and its challenges or opportunities are being shared with the university and college institutions in Toronto to see if we can't be leveraging their talents to help us better understand how it is that, we could, develop better policy, better programs, better investments. I can say this as well. We're an organization that is fast becoming much more outcome focused, and as opposed to reporting annually on our inputs and outputs, we are much more interested, which is really what's positive, I think, in terms of conversations with the federal government and provincial government, is that we're at least using the same language now in terms of how it is that we go about developing policy and programs, and along with that will come legislative reform. So yeah, I don't think we're anywhere near as advanced as I'm sure some of the callers that are involved in the session right now. And it's, you know, it's not just a problem. You know, I do think it is a chance for us to improve greatly. And we have counterparts, certainly some in Canada, but I look to New York, and I look to Chicago and Los Angeles and Boston as places that, you know, have been evolving in this aspect of their service delivery. And so, you know, and I mean, you look at Copenhagen. I mean, Copenhagen sells data to the private sector. I mean, there's examples all around the world of how, you know, smart city thinking has matured. And Toronto, I think, you know, has that opportunity. And quite frankly, what council just approved, you know, from a you know, recovery rebuild standpoint, just puts an exclamation part on how important you know, this is. And so, and the other good thing, I think, at the end of the day is, you know, the key leadership in our organization, I think, is realizing that, you know, we can't approach some of the most critical challenges that we're going to face in any kind of siloized way.
So, Chris, I think we've run out of time, and I'd like to thank you for participating and answering all of these questions. It's much appreciated.